Africa is about 4 times the size of the continental United States and over 3 times the size of all of the land that the U.S. controls. It is an amazing continent. It's very rich. It's very diverse. What that means is we can't cover it in a week. We are, however, going to try and find some universals, some qualities in art that are shared across the continent. This is another view of maps, which will give us a little bit of a sense of the diversity and the scale of Africa. In the map top right, you can see the United States again inserted into the outline of the continent, along with just about every important country in Europe, plus Eastern Europe, plus India, plus China. It is a very large landmass, and it consists of a variety of different ecological zones. From the desert, which is at the top, Sahara Desert, echoed by the Kalahari in the south, to the savanna, which is represented lower left map in the yellow area, and then the green, which is tropical rainforest. We think of jungle, we think of Congo, and to the far eastern portion, East African mountains. So we have a diverse range of environmental factors as well as immense size. Africa as a continent in terms of art and culture should also really be broken into 4 different divisions. The top 2 are going to be most important for us, and in particular the one on the top and the left, which is West Africa, is where we're going to be finding a number of works of art. The central region of Africa, depicted in the map on the right, we will be looking at also, and the Chokwe piece that we're going to be seeing will come from this particular area. The point being, I guess, this is so large, in order to appreciate it, we really have to break it down into divisions with different characteristics for each division. As all of you probably have encountered in other classes that deal with art, African art is often introduced with the appearance of early 20th century modern artists who quote unquote discover it. They would have been able to see it in European ethnographic museums, such as the one that could be found in Paris. The main leaders who influence our perceptions of this would be Picasso, Matisse. I'm also thinking Brancusi in terms of sculpture, but there would have been many, many others. These early artists were looking at African art in terms of the power that African art conveyed. They did not understand how it was used, and quite frankly, they probably didn't care what its original purpose was. It was a way to allow them to seek influence from outside of the West and to bring a new kind of spiritual quality to their own creation. The problem with this is that it implies that African art can only be realized through Western eyes. In other words, that we are the ones who actually bring it to life. I would like us instead to focus on African art in terms of its context, its meaning, and its own importance. Okay, before we do that, however, I think I do have to pay some due to Pablo Picasso, and that's what we're looking at right now. Upper left, that's the young Picasso with his collection of African art behind him. Over on the right, this again is Picasso's collection. The 2 paintings, right and left below, both derive, I do believe, from a mask very much like the one in the center, which Picasso owned. The one on the right is located in the Barnes Museum, so you have a chance to actually see it. I think you can see the kind of chiseled and geometric shape for the nose, the simplification of eyes and mouth, and the power, and that's what was attracting the young Picasso. Okay. I would also like you to take a look at these. This is a self-portrait of Picasso in the upper left, done in 1907, and I think that Picasso as he moves towards Cubism, is being heavily influenced by the flatness of African art and the way in which it reduces the third dimension. The two faces on top are flattening out along a plane, and that's what Picasso was beginning to do in his self-portrait on the left, as he is feeling his way toward the creation of Cubism. I think personally the most significant thing he borrows from African art, however, will be the materials that decorate the surface of African objects. If you look at the two-headed figure in the middle of the bottom row of slides, this is a power figure. We're going to see one like it shortly. This is studded with nails and pieces of metal. If you continue further to the left, that is a mask, a helmet mask, and I'd like you to see the raffia, the grasses essentially, that dangle from the edges of that mask. I do believe that Picasso became aware of the idea of attaching things to the surface of his artworks, in particular of his paintings, from observing the way in which they were used in African art. That would be true for his collage, which is lower right. It is still life with chair caning, and that's real chair caning that has been attached to the surface. If you go up to, this is a reliquary figure, the one at the very top right. It is a face, very abstract, very simplified, covered in metal strips, and it contains two eyes that I believe are tacks that have been added to the surface. By looking at African art, I think that Picasso essentially was given permission to go ahead and add objects, things like chair caning, like bits of newspaper, to the surfaces of his compositions. And by doing that, to open up the entire world of art to embracing and accepting new materials as valid for art forms. Okay. What we're going to do as we attempt to come to terms and understanding of African art is to look at it in terms of its purposes, and I've given us four that I think are particularly important and universal. The first is harmony with the spirit world, the second is political power, the third is law enforcement, and the fourth is maintaining social values and teaching. All of these together are going to create a very strong foundation for social structure, religious beliefs, and political systems in Africa, on the continent. And all of this is going to be shared and communicated through oral tradition. Okay, in Africa, there was no writing before the outside brings it, essentially the West, brings it into Africa. And I would like to stress the fact that there was no need for writing in Africa. And the reason for that is because there was indeed such a very strong oral tradition. The same is going to be true for the New World. That would be Mesoamerica, North America, and South America. We in the New World do not have writing, with the Maya being an exception. But we do not have writing in the New World. We have other forms of recording information, as we'll see, particularly when we get to the Inca, for example. Okay, and for Africa, the way of recording information was through a very, very strong oral tradition, which continues today. Okay. As we, excuse me, as we look at artworks, we're going to be looking again at some visual universals, and these will include pose, expression, proportions, the materials, and the way that they are treated. We're going to look first, in fact, at pose and the way in which the pose is used. I'm going to call it messaging in art to convey an idea. In African sculpture, for instance, there are a number of universally understood poses that can be used in carving or shaping an artwork. This, if you want to simplify it, you can call it body language, standard poses that would be immediately understood by the viewer. The three images that I have on the screen right now, for example, would be pretty good examples of that. If I were to ask you which is the aggressive figure, I think that you're immediately going to go to the figure on the left. That's going to be a figure we're going to revisit later, and it's going to be a power figure. If I were to then ask you which is the figure that suggests grief or mourning to you, sadness, I think that you're probably going to pick the central figure. Now, this is from Jene in West Africa. We don't know a great deal about this culture yet, but we have come to the suggested conclusion that pieces like this, and this is a pretty sophisticated abstraction of the human form, that indeed these are funeral pieces that might be associated with mourning, with sorrow, and with loss. The figure far right is yet again in another pose, but it's a fairly universal pose that we're going to find throughout the continent of Africa. And it is a figure, this time it is a female figure, and she's holding a child behind her. It is a seated figure. She is strong. She is upright. She is seated on a chair, which I think suggests also an important position within society. Whenever you see a stool, a chair in African art, you need to think of the status of the sitter and the fact that the sitter is being respected. In other words, I guess I'd like to say, think throne. Okay. The figure that we have on the screen right now to the left is one that we have seen before. It's another seated female. She is seated on a stool, or again, you can think throne, a chair elevating her and indicating her importance. She's an upright figure, like the last female figure that we looked at, and she also conveys reference to fertility. She is pregnant. She has her hands to her breasts and references her ability to bear children, like the last figure who had a child on her back. And if we could get close enough to see that figure, which is located in pen, she does have a protruding belly button, which is an indication that she too is pregnant. Both of these figures are upright. Both of them are symmetrical. The one that we're looking at right now, which is located in the Metropolitan Museum of Art, is a pretty sophisticated piece, using the negative space of the arms to echo the negative space around the headdress. There are repeated curving forms in the breast that can also be picked up in the headdress, that can be repeated, well, perhaps in the belly with its curving shape, but also almost a triangular shape that is, in fact, echoed by the arms and the shoulders. The woman also has an incredibly long neck, which makes her a very, very elegant figure. So upright and strong and elegant, an image of strength and motherhood. She's also very calm and composed. What the artist is doing here is showing her composure, her cool expression, as a complement to her upright posture, suggesting that she is an individual of great composure and strength, someone who can make a contribution to society. Being seated suggests, in fact, that she has earned a position of respect and a position of authority. The male figure next to her is also located in the Metropolitan Museum of Art. It too comes from the Bamana people in Mali on the west coast. It too is a wood carving. It would have been a companion piece to a mother and child, probably not the one that is opposite it right now, but another piece that would have been relatively similar. The individual is treated in a similar way to the female. He is seated on a chair, in this case, in a very upright posture. He is an individual who is shown as a hunter. He's wearing a hat that would be worn by a hunter. He also has a lance that represents an iron blade with a wooden shaft. This is described, this is in the Met, it's described by the Metropolitan as, quote, a weapon of distinction. What that means is that it would have been passed down from generation to generation, the object of the lance, the weapon itself, that would have been true for the knife that is tucked into his armband as well. Okay, so this figure is treated as a hunter who has achieved great distinction in his lifetime through his accomplishments. I'd also like us to take a look at his expression, and I think we have a detail. Okay, there we go. He is, again, like the woman, calm, self-composed. He has heavily lidded eyes, perhaps even semi-closed eyes, with a closed mouth. He is a figure then who also displays not just the upright posture, but also the cool, calm composure that would be considered to be positive moral virtue and ideal behavior in society. Okay, for both of these, I'm assuming that they're ancestral figures intended to honor the ancestral spirit with an ideal depiction. To make a positive connection to the spirit world. We do know that they were used in initiations and in festivals, but I think we could safely also put them into the context of belief in ancestor figures, or excuse me, ancestor spirits. Okay. The pose of the male in the figure in the Metropolitan Museum of Art that we're looking at combines strength of his body with composure of his mind. This is referred to, this expression that we just saw, is referred to as the cool, C-O-O-L. And what it references in particular is moderation, control, good character, and ideal behavior. It basically suggests that you have your act together. And the cool complements the upright posture. The figure that is located on the left, which is in O'Reilly, it's 7.8 in our textbook in O'Reilly, comes from a different sector of Africa. It comes from Central Africa, from the Chokwe people, who are very, very famous wood carvers. And this is one of the depictions of a particularly significant cultural hero, Chabunda Alunga. We're going to call him mythic hero because that's a lot easier to pronounce. This is a figure who is cool, and we'll see a closer look at his face to be able to pick that up in a minute. But he also has a greater dynamism to his pose than the seated figure on our right. The reason for that is that this mythic hero was known as a great and powerful hunter who is known as a culture hero who teaches his people to hunt. He is also going to be a figure who is important to the Chokwe for expanding the boundaries of his kingdom, and in particular he was known as a great elephant hunter. The Chokwe were elephant hunters and ivory traders. So when you have such an important mythic cultural figure, you want to show him in the most powerful way possible. So he has very large hands and feet out of proportion to the rest of his body. He's holding a staff in one hand and a medicine horn in his other hand. And in the slide, that would be his left hand. A medicine horn would reference power and probably magical strength that he also had that would be used by great hunters. The headdress that he is wearing is typical of the Chokwe. It is an indication of his status as chief. It's bark cloth and rattan, and it is a kind of universal symbol of the power to rule, the right to rule. If you look closely, you're also going to see some real hair attached to his chin, referencing his beard, and that in turn is going to reference his maleness and his manliness. It is a small piece. It measures about 16 inches in height, yet it is incredibly massively carved and very, very monumental. appropriate to a famous hunter and a cultural hero. One of the things that is important and that appears over and over in African images is the flexed legs of our figure. Whenever we see a figure that has flexed legs, we tend to see very strong calves and very strong thighs. Let me try the next picture. There you go. It suggests his power, his ability, his strength, but more than that, it also suggests his flexibility and his ability to respond to everything. In other words, quite literally, he is shown as a flexible person and a flexible individual. Okay, the detail on our right shows the cool, calm expression, but in this case, the pose of our figure implies perhaps a greater degree of strength and power as a hunter, and we are in fact dealing with someone who hunted elephants. Okay, this is an additional Chokwe piece, and it is a staff that would have been held by a ruler. It has the same kind of headdress and the same kind of composure, same kind of swelling forms, and the idea of conveying strength and energy. Again, conveying the power of a chief, and this would have been, I'm going to say, kind of authority symbol. The wavy portion below the face would have helped your hand to maintain its position so that you could have held the staff while announcing essentially your authority. This is owned by the Pennsylvania U of Penn Museum of Archaeology and Anthropology, which I highly recommend that you take a look at, visit, to see some pretty good African art. Okay, let me just sum up before we go to the next PowerPoint section. African art can be classed as cool, and that's what we've been looking at, or its opposite, which is powerful, and we're going to see a sample of that soon. It can often be understood through, and let me insert the word universal, pose and expression and proportions, and we will talk about proportions as well as materials and their treatment. Traditional African art, and by traditional I mean pre-colonial, before the influence of the West, before the influence of colonial powers, did serve a purpose. It was created to serve a purpose, usually aiming at social, religious, and political harmony in this world. Okay, in other words, it falls within the context of what we've called a maintenance belief system. And art was one of the tools that served that system. Okay, a reminder, the major purposes would be to keep harmony with the spirit world, to keep political power. The Chokwe piece, I think, does relate to politics because it's a depiction of a ruler, and it reminds us that the right to rule goes back to a mythic hero. It also, number 3, enforces laws and social control. We're going to see that with a power figure. And it maintains, number 4, social values, and it can be used to teach. This is particularly important, and we will pick that up in our next talkie with some gold weights.